Right now, Chris Christie cleared of all wrongdoing in Bridgegate. That's at least according to Christie's own in-house investigation. Is that pending report enough to change the game in the Christie investigations? Well, we'll talk with one of the governor's biggest critics, who just happens to be on the panel doing its own independent review. And then, how far does personal political gain go? Well, a new report accuses New York power broker Assembly Speaker Shelley Silver of blocking a development in his Lower East Side district and stopping the ethnic and voter changes that would bring, in part, they claim, to help ensure his own electability. It's a fascinating mix of real estate, politics, progress, and politics, and our panel will sound off. And later, the comedic side of New York politics and political reporting. The RNN and Files One news teams, including our own Dominic Carter here, skewering everybody from the mayor to Albany all this evening, and we will skewer them. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Monday evening, March 24th. And we start tonight at the GW Bridge and the September traffic jam in Fort Lee that simply will not go away for Governor Christie and his political aspirations, try though as he may. Now, back in January, Christie, he tried to talk the scandal away with a nearly 2-hour press conference where he insisted he had no prior knowledge of the lane closures and insisted it was all the work of his subordinates. Now, Christie trying again, as details of a report by the attorneys that he hired to investigate are leaked to the New York Times, and surprise, surprise, Christie's attorneys say he did nothing wrong. Now, for more on the report and reaction to it, let's bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman.
Well, Rich, this internal report covers both the bridge scandal and the accusations that the Christie administration used Sandy relief for the city of Hoboken as leverage to pressure the mayor into advancing a real estate deal pushed by Christie supporters. And it did not include any information from either Bridget Kelly, who wrote the Time for Traffic Problems in Fort Lee email, or Bill Stepien, Christie's two-time campaign manager. Both have refused to cooperate with investigations. Still, the Christie team is ready with its report after 70 interviews and a $1 million price tag to taxpayers. And it concludes, quote, that the governor was not involved in the plotting or directing of the lane closings. It does not reportedly determine whether Christie knew of the closings or when he became aware. That conclusion is being viewed skeptically by Christie's critics, one of whom is State Senator Loretta Weinberg, a member of the committee investigating the scandals.
It's not an impartial outside review. I don't know what documents they might have reviewed, whether we in the Select Committee on Investigation have access to those documents, have had access to those documents, or will have access to those documents, are all questions that remain to be seen. At the very foundation of all of this is an atmosphere that being in your face, that there is nothing out of bounds, that if you say something about me, I'm going to punch you back hard. That kind of atmosphere leads to excesses. And it is an atmosphere that came from the top and permeated the top levels of our government. If nothing else, the governor is responsible for the atmosphere that was set by his administration.
We also asked Senator Weinberg whether the timeline of the investigation exists, whether there's a put up or shut up point to link Christie to the scandals.
There is no deadline of, quote, put up or shut up. The deadline is whenever we get all the documents that we've requested and get a chance to ask the central cast of characters who produced those documents what was behind them. That's the deadline.
Finally, on the cost of hiring the attorneys who prepared that report, the senator noted Governor Christie had every legal right to hire noted attorney Randy Mastro to represent his staffers, and they had every right to a defense at taxpayer expense. But as for the governor himself,
in terms of the governor hiring this attorney to look at his office, that is a decision the governor, I guess, is legally allowed to make. I just would suggest that he could have had an internal review of his office if he'd only asked some of his top-level employees what did they do and why did they do it, and we could have gotten answers much earlier and much less expensive.
So, Rich, clearly the findings of this report not slowing down the critics of Governor Christie, Loretta Weinberg included.
Right, and she being one of those chief critics, like you said, Andrew. Thank you. And for more, let's bring in our panel tonight, Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College and professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist, author, and star of this weekend's Inner Circle comedy show in the city. By the way, Iona and Syracuse out of the tournament. Jonathan Yedden, a Democratic consultant with the Advance Group and a former executive director for the Kings County Democratic Party. And we met Andrew there before. Okay. Jeannie, the appearance of what the report will say, it hasn't come out, but they've obviously leaked some of the findings. You know, you've got some former federal prosecutors that were part of this 12-person panel that were hired, but also with a lot of ties, this law firm, to Christie, and we still haven't heard from some of the major principals, including Mr. Stepien and obviously Bridget Kelly as well. How much credence do you think and how much PR value will this report, when it finally comes out, really have with the public?
Well, it probably has some PR value because you look at the top of the news, it says Christie cleared in report. But you think about it, have you ever known a lawyer to say that his client was guilty? I mean, and this is what we're actually talking about. So no, I don't think it has much credence in the ways that matter, in terms of the legal system, in terms of what the federal prosecutors decide to do, in terms of what the legislative committees tried to do. It may have some small PR value, but in all seriousness, nobody could have expected anything different. For example, Dawn Zimmer, she didn't speak to, the mayor of Hoboken did not speak to these people. So you've got a lot of people that were left out of this quote-unquote investigation. So we may get some new information, but in terms of clearing Christie, not so fast.
And Dominic, the one thing I've heard as an argument is some of the people involved with this, I know you know Randy Mastro, but the other people that came from former prosecutors' office, I know Christie was a prosecutor and there's a brotherhood, if you will, a little bit of the former prosecutors. That all said, they've got reputations and real jobs in the real world. If it comes out with the subsequent investigations that theirs looks like a cover-up or something else, they get harmed. I've heard a lot of people say they're not going to put something out to get themselves embarrassed later. Are we potentially minimizing here that there may be no smoking gun and nothing attached themselves to Christie, that nobody's going to turn up?
Not in my opinion, Richard. The bottom line is if information comes out later that's contrary to what they're putting out now, they will simply say, we went with the findings based on the information that we had at that time. Governor Christie says he didn't do anything wrong. Okay, it's all over with now. It's ridiculous. He's using taxpayer dollars.
$1 million, yeah.
$1 million.
To say that he did nothing wrong, to investigate himself. Can I investigate myself? I can be made a knight in shining armor as well.
Who are you thinking? Hey, Jonathan, do you think we ever hear? I mean, I've spoken to people sat in that same chair, prominent attorneys. They say, listen, it don't look good what happened on the bridge. Certainly you can argue abuse of power, but we haven't found the crime yet. Do you think at the end of the day we're ever going to hear from Bridget Kelly and Stepien about what they knew, who they told, and whether the governor was ever in the loop?
It all depends on what they offer in exchange for basically telling the truth. Should there be anything? I mean, should they get faced with going to jail for a long period of time or something like that? Then sure, they're going to do what they could to come to an plea agreement, and that might include throwing Christie or some other person that we might not know about under the bus. But the damage is definitely done. I mean, you look at his poll numbers, prospects for 2016, or even his prospects for re-election. Yeah, he just started his second term. But there's the people, he's a polarizing character to begin with, but there's no question those that don't believe him, and that's it.
We do know in your world the optics of this, which is Christie's people have already chosen to do the town halls. They've even done some town halls in less than, let's say, loving, embracing areas where he's got 3-1 Democrats, even that he had a tough time with. But they feel, all right, the worst may be behind us. Let's put him out in the troubled waters right now, see how he plays. And he's going back to the other Christie where he's being not as, but still more confrontational than we saw, let's say, a month or two ago. Do you think internally they say either we got nothing to lose or maybe that the worst is behind us?
Well, they know, just being internally, they know a lot more about this than we do as the public. But I do think that the way they look at it is he's hit sort of rock bottom. He can only go up from here. Let's get him out there. Let's conduct business as usual as much as possible. We're innocent. I mean, if we got nothing to hide, why should we act any differently?
Rock bottom, obviously, is if there is an email that links him to it, or if there is, eyewitness accounts to say he knew what was going on. That's worse than, a guy who couldn't manage his own staff or created a culture where this is permissible.
Well, there's a couple of different levels here. The worst case scenario is that there's something criminally responsible that Christie knew about or engineered.
We haven't even heard criminal charges.
And in that case, he's gone immediately, if not sooner. The second biggest thing is that, you know, he knew about it and lied to New Jersey voters in the 2-hour-long press conference, which hurts him politically but doesn't necessarily remove him from office. The third one is just that he looks bad, and if the legislative committee comes back and says, well, he was responsible for this, this is his fault, that's when this report may actually have some weight, because he's got their report and I've got my report, and the two of them sort of conflict with one another. The interesting thing is Senator Weinberg kept coming back to the culture that Christie established, and as Christie goes back to...
But by the way, which tells me, if she's going back to culture, that means she doesn't think she has any smoking gun that speaks to action.
I'm not so
Culture's
sure.
something different.
I'm not so sure, because I think that's the most lasting argument against Governor Christie at this point, because as you were talking about with the going back to the abrasive town hall style, she's trying to turn that into an argument against
We've
Chris
heard this
Christie.
for months, Andrew.
No. But in this light, in the light coming out of this scandal, that this tough guy image that plays well at the town halls is responsible for these people backing up Fort Lee intentionally for political payback. That may have more sticking power in the context
But
after
if
the
that's
scandal
all there
breaks.
is, you can not only survive it, you can arguably, given where we are in the calendar, come back from that, can't you? If all it was this guy was an absentee landlord who created this environment where people thought they could be phony tough guys and try and do political payback, but he says, whatever they thought, that's not who I am, and you can't show me anywhere where I told somebody to do something like that. If nobody can prove otherwise, can he politically recover? I know Dominic says no. Can he recover now that we're in March of 2014?
Depends on how you define recovery. He can survive.
Is
he can
electable
maintain his
nationally?
governorship. I do not think so, but I never thought he was electable as a Republican nationally at this point. I mean, who was putting him out there? It was Democrats that were all excited about him. He was, oh, please.
Major Republican
oh,
donors.
please.
You read the same books I have.
No. It was mostly moderate Democrats who were excited about him. He was not going to
He's
survive
head of the
those
RGA.
primaries and
That's not
caucuses.
the Democrats
He absolutely
who
is. And
appointed
why
to that.
is he head of the RGA? Because he can work and operate in a blue state. He can't do that so well right now. Sure, he's trying to conduct business as usual, but he can't do that. He's got a horrible economic situation in New Jersey. He's got to have some successes there, and I don't think it's going to translate nationally regardless of what happens.
I'm just waiting for Dominic to say, preach on, Jim.
Am I right?
The RGA chief before the scandal broke. Keep that in mind, too.
He still kept the gig.
Richard,
Fair enough.
just remember, I know you're short on time. Just remember, polling showed that Rudy Giuliani was headed to the White House, that no one could beat the great Rudy. And what happened?
Still in Florida campaign.
He never went to New Hampshire.
Now, this next story may sound like inside baseball, but trust me, this is, I think, one of the more amazing stories about how power, politics, and so many other things all kind of interconnect, and why Manhattan, one of the most expensive chunks of real estate in the world, why would 5 blocks of land remain vacant for nearly 50 years? We're going to be talking about that, and the answer, as I said, politics, power, ethnic divides, changes, failed development plans, and the guy on your screen, Shelley Silver, one of the 3 most important people in New York politics, many argue. We're going to tell you all about that and more after this.